Matt and Luke's Sci-Fi Sanctuary.
The year is 3013. The galaxy is scintillating in the mellow light. Two galactic pilgrims seek out vistas in the samurai future to bring forth the unity of the cosmic shaman. Opening the door of the pantheon of mystics, the evil sorcerer wizard powers the engine of science, seeking to forever alter the sacred balance, traveling on effervescent balls of summer fire.
This week, Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home.
In the year 2019, I ate whale meat for the first time, but I didn't realize till afterwards that it made me super depressed.
Yeah, oh man, mine goes all the way back to, I think, 2004. I thought I was buying like raw tuna, like I was going to have like a sushi fun, and we're starting this off.
I was at that buffet meal last year, and it just looked like some breaded chicken or something. So I'd eaten it, and then I think it was Mie Sensei was like, "Oh, so how do you like whale?" I'm like, "Oh, I've never eaten whale. I don't want to eat whale." Like, you literally just ate whale. Oh no!
So okay, we live in Japan. Sometimes we don't know what we're eating, and the folks here are both eating whale. This is horrible, because today's movie is Star Trek, the one with the whales.
We didn't actually introduce ourselves.
No, I just wanted to scream that out. So this is Matt.
This is Luke.
Welcome to the
Sci-Fi Sanctuary.
Yes, you got the whole title. That's cool.
You know I don't like it when we do like one word each. It sounds weird.
Yeah, well, it works out that way. For Star Trek, it's always fun to get a nice roundtable discussion going on. We've been give a shout out to the Roddenberry podcast, because we've been poaching people from them for our Star Trek movies. And for Star Trek 4, we have got Sue and Sarah from Women at Warp having a chat with us. So hello.
Hi.
Hello.
We got both of you. So I tell you my story. When I first heard your podcast, I started listening to Mission Log, and I was listening to Trek Files. And for you guys, I just finished the Picard novel, which I enjoyed actually quite well. And the train stopped after work. Now, I could have made a few more phone calls and gotten a ride or taken a taxi. I was like, I'm just going to walk 32 miles home, like in the middle of the night. And I just hardcored like several of your podcasts with the Picard ones and a few others. So it was enjoyable to be accompanied with your podcast on that long walk through the dark night.
Actually, 32 miles? Because that's at least a 4 to 5 hour walk.
Kilometers. Yeah, that's where my brain got stuck too.
Oh, sorry. This is Japan. Kilometers. For miles, we could take that down.
That's
okay,
miles,
so it's more like 13 miles.
20 miles. 20 miles-ish. Okay. It was pretty intense, but I don't know. It was just like I wanted to see if I could do it.
That's a long walk.
It was fun. Yeah. My legs didn't hurt the next day, so that was good. Luke did it too, but he did it in the middle of the day, so.
Yeah, and slightly further, but yeah, because mine was about 50 kilometers.
Oh, because you did it.
I did it all the way from my house to
yeah. So.
But yeah, I made the mistake of doing it in like full sunshine, and I was absolutely exhausted by the end.
And Luke had an amazing sunburn on his head too.
Yeah. When you're bald, you always have to wear a hat.
Getting into our first impressions on Star Trek 4, I already talked Star Trek 3 being one of the first films I think I saw in the theater, at least ones that weren't an anime and animated. Sorry. In Japan, we call Disney anime too. But I do know this was the first one that I was kind of excited about going to the theater to see. Star Trek 3, my dad kind of dragged me and I enjoyed it. But this one, I just I want to see it. And then the next year was Next Gen. I had all the toys. I don't believe Star Trek 4 had any toys, which is too bad. But I've referenced before a few times on this podcast, Big Lebowski syndrome, where I've seen the movie so many times I can't watch it. This does go in that category. I enjoyed watching it, but honestly, I could just play the whole thing in my head without really even putting a screen on. So
I think this was the first Star Trek film I saw.
I think that's true for a lot of people.
It's the one I have the earliest memory, because this one was on TV in the UK all the time. And I was like already watching Next Gen, probably watching the original series on reruns sometimes as well. And so if like Star Trek came up in the TV guide, I'm like, oh, I'll watch some Star Trek. And I just remember this being really like, oh, this is fun. They go back to modern times in this one. I've never seen that before. Not knowing they did it like 3 times a season in the original series anyway. But
yeah, there is a lot of tomorrow is yesterday plowing through here. I guess I'll go alphabetical. Sarah, what were your first impressions on this one?
I honestly can't remember when I saw this one for the first time. I remember my first Star Trek movie was Star Trek V, and I only saw it because I used to go live with my grandparents in Nagoya in the summers, and my aunt and uncle took me to a double feature, and it was Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade and Star Trek V. So that was my first Star Trek movie in the theaters. I was watching Next Gen on TV, and I think I must have watched Star Trek 4 on TV at some point. That must have been it.
I've got to ask, what were your first impressions of 5 then? We actually like that one, but yeah, it has its reputation.
I liked it in the theater. Now, keep in mind, I was like 10 or 12 or something. I can't remember what year it came out. I remember I liked the scene with them when they're out camping and they're climbing the cliff and all of that. And I remember whenever the Klingons were talking, there would be English subtitles at the bottom and Japanese down the side, so the screen got pretty busy.
That's cool. Yeah, we were definitely used to that, watching movies in theaters in Japan, well, at least until recently.
It's a dice roll whether you're going to get the English subtitles and the Japanese or just the Japanese.
Yeah, sometimes we just kind of gotta guess what those subtitles are going to be. Yeah, actually with 5, I went to see it with my dad on opening night, and we hated it. Now I like it. It's like I've grown to actually like that one a lot.
See, I don't think I watched it until I was like in my teens and had the DVD, because I'd always heard it was terrible and just assumed that was true.
But yeah, we can already feel the black hole of 5 pulling us in, for better or for worse. So let's get back to 4. And Sue, what were your original impressions here?
Similarly, I honestly don't know when I first saw this film. I was young enough that if my family took me to the theater, I have no memory of it now. But I also just feel like it was always sort of there. Star Trek was just on in my house if it was on TV. So I grew up with reruns of the original series on TV. I grew up with whenever the movies were on, they were on TV. I do remember watching the first season of Next Gen at home, but I can't tell you when I first watched Voyage Home. It's always been in my brain.
We just actually, it's what is currently airing on our show. We did like sort of 80s sci-fi comedy month, and we did kind of the Bill and actually all 3 of Bill and Ted's. Now there's a third. We did Short Circuit, and this kind of goes in that batch.
It almost feels, I could imagine this one being made without any of the other ones being made.
Yeah.
Like Star Trek was a TV show from the 60s. Here's a comedy one where we bring it back and they meet the modern world.
Well, I heard on international releases, I saw an Australian poster which just says The Voyage Home and then really tiny Star Trek 4. And apparently for international release, they did make a 10-minute recap to prologue the film with Shatner narrating, just to catch those international audiences up. So in many places, this did exist as a standalone film.
Yeah, it was... Sorry, my brain just stopped. Star Trek films did not do well in the overseas markets. So they tried, when they were marketing or promoting this one overseas, they tried to remove the Star Trek branding from it to make people think it was just, a fun sci-fi action film.
And I read this actually was the first Star Trek movie shown in the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm. With Greenpeace, I think.
Yeah, something like that.
Oh, wow.
That's cool. They could definitely have some fun with Chekhov getting caught by the Navy then. Yeah.
It seems like the worst one to show in the Soviet Union.
Sorry, just found it. Not Greenpeace, the World Wildlife Fund.
Oh, nice.
Oh, okay. But yeah, I know
that makes more sense.
This was the most successful one until the Kelvinverse.
I can believe that.
Yeah.
What's weird is in places, and I don't think this is true because there are like great effect shots. It feels like this was the we've given up and don't have any money one.
The soundtrack does that.
Just the fact that it's set in. It's like, well, that's what they did in the TV show, right? We don't have money for a sci-fi set this week, so we're going to use something on the backlot.
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't make any new ships for this one. They did make the probe was new, but all of the shots of ships and Starbase and all of that, those were reused.
And the probe's just a tube.
Mm-hmm.
That glowing thing.
It's got the glowing ball.
Yeah, I read about them, putting in translucent tubes and I guess a motor or something. I'm not quite sure how they did that, but I'm not quite an FX geek, I guess. I mean, it's always fun to hear about, but I certainly don't.
I never remember any of it. Yeah.
That's my point. Yes. Let's get a little deeper in the film, but first I'll just I'll regale us all with the tale of Star Trek IV. A massive probe approaches Earth. It takes out Starfleet vessels and depowers Earth's orbital defenses. Upon reaching Earth, it lets loose a strange signal and begins vaporizing the oceans. Meanwhile, on Vulcan, the senior crew of the late starship Enterprise under Admiral James T. Kirk prepares to go home and face the Piper. They had managed to save their crewmate Spock, but shattered multiple Federation laws in the process. Spock joins them for the voyage and their stolen Klingon bird of prey. He stands with his crew. Once our intrepid crew approaches Earth, though, they receive a distress call from Starfleet Command to stay away due to the effects of the probe. Kirk and crew deduce that the probe's signal is actually calling out to the now extinct species of humpback whales. The only thing to do is to slingshot around the sun, sending them back into Earth's past where they can procure a few of those whales. Doing this, they successfully make it to 1986 San Francisco. But the bird of prey is losing power. Kirk and Spock go looking for the whales, while Dr. McCoy and Engineer Scott try to fabricate an aquarium on the bird of prey that will hold the massive whales in the water. Commanders Chekhov and Uhura go looking for a nuclear substitute to power their spaceship, while Sulu ends up mostly on the cutting room floor. Kirk and Spock have some success meeting Dr. Gillian Taylor, a marine scientist who looks after aquarium-bound whales, despite Spock jumping into the drink and trying to mind meld with the whales. They've got to move fast, though, as the whales will soon be released into the wild. Complications ensue when Chekhov is captured, injured, and hospitalized after siphoning power from a nuclear naval ship. And the whales are released a touch early. The former Enterprise crew manages to rescue Chekhov as well as the whales, who were just about to meet the harpoon of a whaling vessel. With the whales beamed on board into the new reinforced aquarium, the ship blasts back to the future with Dr. Taylor still in tow. The whales then have a chit-chat with the probe, which is finally satisfied and leaves. Marooned in the future, Dr. Taylor joins a science vessel, while Kirk and crew are mostly exonerated since they saved the Earth, except for Kirk, who is demoted to captain. Fortunately, that is exactly what he wants, especially when they hand over a brand spanking new Enterprise A to go along with the rank.
Time moves backwards, I get older and younger, and I see.
Am I right in thinking this is the first Star Trek movie which came out when Next Gen was a thing?
Next Gen basically got mostly greenlit because this one was successful.
Oh, okay, so it wasn't airing yet when this came out.
This came out, I think, October or November 1986.
Thanksgiving weekend.
There we go. And Next Gen, I think they've been basically like doing the brainstorming on it at that point. But once this took off, that's when it was like, okay, here's your money. Go make this, please.
The only reason I mention it is because in this one, it very much feels like an ensemble cast film.
I love that about this movie, how every character has their thing they have to contribute.
Which is much more of a Next Gen thing than an original series thing.
I think that's really an 80s thing, right? It's not just Star Trek doing this. It's how storytelling changed. at this point in history, and you're seeing a lot more ensemble casts in television and movies at this point in media history.
Yeah, I guess the 70s there were sort of the renegade directors. Is it Nashville? Which city is it? I don't know. Robert Altman films. Then you get Hill Street Blues. So I guess by this time it's just kind of worked its way into a whole lot of movies and TV.
I'm gonna tell you, I'm a British guy who was born in 1990. All of those shows you just mentioned went over my head.
So they got ensemble casts. No MASH? No MASH?
I'm vaguely aware of MASH.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess that wouldn't be a British thing.
No.
Okay.
I mean, television at least seems to oscillate, right, between the ensemble cast and the star-driven shows. And I think we're back in ensemble again. But
I think Game of Thrones kind of switched us back over.
But if you look 10 years ago, you're looking at a show that has a star that is driving it. So it's interesting.
The one part of the ensemble that we kind of talked a little bit about this in Star Trek 3, but watching, I was like, oh, yeah, that really is the case, is that, George Takei really got the short end of the stick, because he did have that ensemble stuff, and it all ended up not shot or on the cutting room floor.
Yeah, I actually found myself thinking, wait, where's Sulu? What's he doing?
Yeah.
He's cutting between all these different groups, and he's just not getting screen time.
Exactly.
I couldn't even remember, what his mission was supposed to be.
I mean, he had a little bit. He went and got the helicopter and was talking to the guy, and he knew what kind of helicopter it was, even though they were way in the past. I thought that was pretty cool.
It is. No, it's cool. But I believe there was a filmed deleted scene where he was actually in the air talking to the guy some more, just expanding his story.
I think there was it filmed or just written? There was a scene where he meets his own ancestors.
We actually got the story from Larry Nemechek talking Star Trek 3, but when they walk by the Yellow Pages ad, there's a woman who comes out, and that is supposed to be Sulu's great-great-grandmother, and he meets a kid, which is his great-great-grandfather. And the kid was on set. They were going to do a scene, but there was some issue, and they had to stop filming, and it never happened.
Huh.
So,
yeah,
I think they ran out of light.
But that was the thing. He actually he was supposed to be a proper part of the ensemble, and kind of got cut on that. So that's a bummer. The other actors do quite well by that, of course. So maybe we should get into them. Chekhov, in Star Trek 3, he had that cape, which looked ridiculous. I really wanted him walking the streets of San Francisco with that cape, though. That is the place to wear a cape.
Yeah. This is the first time ever that Chekhov gets to be an actual character.
Yeah.
What was the most lines he'd had before this that weren't screams?
Oh, I was about screams. So okay.
Oh yeah, but that's the number one thing people remember from this film, right? Is where are the nuclear vessels?
Yeah.
See, that scene is great, but I enjoy even more when he's captured and he is unintentionally sassing the naval officer.
It's very cute.
That is the one. I had not forgotten about that scene, but I had kind of forgotten about how entertaining it was.
It's amazing that at the age he was making this film, he still captures so much boyish charm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think Koenig still has some of that, honestly. I heard an interview with him recently where he had quite a bit to say.
Fair enough.
I guess Nichelle Nichols does get a nice amount to do here. I always feel she was always underused, and just, she was already in a very groundbreaking role, but never got a whole lot to do. What 3 gave her to do, she gets some nice stuff to do here.
Yeah, she's still mostly manning the phone, but she does get to go and do some stuff.
Yeah, I found it interesting. Nichelle's the only one who really stays in full uniform for the entire film. Everybody else is in civvies, but she's still in her monster maroon. And she gets to go off with Chekhov at the start, but escapes, I guess, is beamed out in time. So it cuts her screen time down, unfortunately. It's not as bad as in 5 when she forgets how to speak Klingon, which has always made me so angry. But
yeah, being charitable.
We've certainly seen worse representation for our women on the crew in the Star Trek films.
I think in this one I can kind of forgive them because if she had been there, the whole "he's a Russian" thing wouldn't quite have worked as well.
Sure.
So I would imagine that's why they beamed her out early. But yeah, it still leaves a little disappointing that she doesn't get a bit more to do.
She really does is she tracks the whales, and that's about it.
Yeah. One thing I guess this film does have is, well, it doesn't have Eddie Murphy, but it has one of the few like notable female roles in a Trek film when you get right down to it, with Dr. Taylor.
I love Gillian Taylor so much. She is. Do we swear on this show or no?
Oh yeah,
fuck
yeah.
Okay. She is not here for bullshit, right? She is doing her job. She cares the most about her whales. She doesn't care who these randos are who are her here asking all of these questions. But even when she finds out the truth and decides that she's going to go with the Bounty crew, not the Enterprise crew at this point, the Bounty's crew, to Back to the Future, she's doing it to protect her whales, and that full stop. And she's intrigued by Kirk. She's interested in him. But when it comes right down to it, she's choosing George and Gracie over him. No, hands down, no matter what.
And I guess that's why I like her being in this film. I mean, if it had been the originally thought of Eddie Murphy, there would have been plenty of bullshit. So it is a good choice for this film.
I think that character and that role is what makes it feel like we were saying earlier, one of the typical 80s comedies. That she's like Stephanie from Short Circuit. She's exactly that character bumping into the Star Trek crew.
She is sharper than Stephanie from...
Well, yeah. But she's still like the modern day point of view female character.
This didn't strike me till watching it this time, though. If she's the assistant director, why is she giving the tour?
She just loves them whales, and she loves talking about whales.
Okay, sure, I'll take that explanation.
It might have been like a particular press tour rather than just...
Yeah, I'd ask how Kirk and Spock got on that tour then, but how do they get in half of their situation?
Yeah.
They just added themselves to the back of the crowd.
No. We've all done it.
Yeah, there we go. Well, and Spock finds his way out of the back of the crowd too, which is of course fun.
I don't know if that was Leonard Nimoy or a stunt double, but when he's swimming with the whales, he's got a fine ass.
Yeah, sure.
I couldn't help but notice.
No, I'm the one, we just recorded Reanimator a few days ago, and I recognized the Terminator stunt double's ass, so. So guys can do that too, I guess. Nimoy is definitely like, Star Trek 2, he was kind of on the fence if he really wanted to be there. I guess drove a truckload of money to his house. 3, he's not in it, so this is the first time we've really seen him kind of relishing the Spock role for quite a... I mean, he's great in 2, of course, but here he's just relishing the role, I think.
Yeah, he's having a lot of fun with it, it feels.
Spock has sort of hit a reset button, right? Because of what's gone on the Genesis planet. And he is the most like Data in this film, speaking of its proximity to Next Gen, than he is, I think, anywhere else in the TOS stories.
I think we talked about this on, was it the Wrath of Khan one? How he gets Arnold Rimmered, and how every time he has a character breakthrough, they have to hit the reset button because they don't know how to write Spock once he gets over his Vulcanness. Yeah. Because, like Star Trek 1, he comes in, he's super logical, but then by the end, he's warmed up a bit. Star Trek 2, they don't know what to do, so they kill him off. So then they bring him back, and he has to go through that process again.
Guess it's fun to watch.
Yeah, I get it. It's always nice when he's cold at the start and you see him, be their friend by the end. But it gets a bit repetitive eventually.
I do think he and William Shatner are really great when they're playing off each other in the scene where they're all in the truck together.
That scene is like my favorite in this film. It's so funny.
Shatner really is good at comedy, and then I think for the first time you really see how great Leonard Nimoy is as playing the straight guy.
Well, there's a real skill in being the straight guy in a comedy.
Yeah. We're definitely seeing, in the future scenes, I guess we see some Kirk. In the San Francisco scenes, we're seeing a whole lot more Shatner. Maybe it's the surroundings, or maybe Kirk just loosens up in the past. I don't know.
It was 2 different writers. So Harvey Bennett wrote the parts in the future, and Nicholas Meyer wrote the part in the 80s.
Oh, I didn't know that. Because they're very different.
Definitely different feel, yeah.
Yeah, and that's... I had seen that note. And I think there's like even like basically a deleted scene from Time After Time that shows up. Is that the punk rocker? No, that's Leonard Nimoy's New York Story being turned. But there's something that comes from Time After Time that was basically taken from that script and plunked into Star Trek 4.
Yeah, I don't know. You've read more on this sort of thing than I have.
Yeah, I was hoping someone's going to fill in the gaps on that. Oh, well, I do like the punk rocker. Who knows, maybe if I have some time, I'll just cover that song and stick it between segments. The I Hate You song. I like that song.
They wrote that just for the movie.
Yeah, I think the actor that's the punk rock actually wrote the song and performed it as well. So
he's just a typical guy who goes around trying to sell his mixtapes in American cities.
This massive boombox. But I think you can tell he's personally involved with the song because just his middle finger comes at like just the right moment.
Yeah.
I got to say, I have, fantasies of doing something like that on public transportation.
Just the Vulcan pinch.
Vulcan neck pinch to the annoying person across the hall.
Everyone has that dream that you do that and get the big cheer. But
in Japan, they're pretty tame on the train. Most of the time, usually it's like some salary man has just fallen asleep on you is the problem.
One of my favorites, I was taking a train home one day, and there was this very drunk salary man. He'd bought himself an ice cream, and he just like stretched out over the whole chair. And I've never seen anyone enjoy anything as much as this guy was just loving this ice cream. And he just looked like the coolest dude I've ever seen. Just lounging, just like savoring every bite of this ice cream.
Better experience than the guy that just kept flipping forward and falling on top of me. Which does happen. Yeah, in America, I guess you'd start fights with that stuff. But they unfortunately don't do that too much in Japan.
I've definitely been here long enough now that when other foreigners get on the train and talk loudly, I just join in the Japanese disapproving glare. No, you're quiet on trains. Shush.
Any other? I guess I'll just need to shout Mark Leonard's name because he's here. I mean, he's basically just here. It's just always nice to see him.
Yeah.
Mark Leonard, Haseric.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Why did I not know his name?
How can we forget Scotty in the computer scene?
Oh yeah,
hello, computer.
Yeah, I put in my notes which we're not looking at. I think Luke has seen me at work like doing this on multiple occasions.
Yeah, you age 20 years whenever you're close to a computer.
I do similar. I think it's what's especially interesting to me about that scene paired with one later in the film, right? It's McCoy who's with him, who's like, aren't you worried about contaminating the timeline? But then in the hospital, he sees this woman with kidney failure. And without a second thought, he's like, just take this pill. It'll be fine. And she grows a new kidney.
What I love about that Scotty and McCoy team up is that they're a perfect mix of very smart and very stupid.
Depending on the context.
What I think is like Scotty knows engineering and McCoy knows medicine, but neither of them are like command material or decision-making material. So Scotty's like, well, maybe he invented it. And McCoy's like, yeah, sure, why not?
One thing I did notice that I guess for the first time on this is I never caught on just when they're being given their assignments how much McCoy's like, why are you giving me the crap job? Because he wants to go be part of the trio, which is now a duo.
This film for me is quintessential Bones. Right? Because he is prickly and he's grumpy and he is not here for what's going on. But at the end of the day, the thing he cares most about is saving people and their well-being. And that's what we see throughout this. That characterization, wow, never wavers here. And it's on full display with Bones in the one with the whales.
The hospital scene in particular was like peak Bones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much the first scene I think of, at least for movie Bones.
Oh, yeah, other than that, it would just be like scenes where he's the guy who talks to Kirk.
Well, we've already shown our appreciation of Disco Bones with the giant beard and stuff. But
I mean, yeah, if you're talking visually, then that's the best Bones you can get. Big beard and flared trousers.
I was going to say, I think Sulu wins the costume contest for this movie, though, with his giant like poncho cape thing.
Yeah, Cowboy Sulu is great.
Aqua Blue.
That was. I want that outfit.
I would 100% wear that.
I think Lando would wear that one.
Yeah, that's pretty Lando.
It was very Lando.
I would also wear, and this is probably not a good thing to admit, I would totally wear like Shatner's maroon, like suede suit.
Oh yeah. To work.
Yeah. It's like almost Austin Powers.
His white undershirt, like his white dress shirt under that suit jacket, looks an awful lot like the white undershirt that Kai Wynn wears.
Oh yeah, from DS9, yeah. Oh, the other thing I remember putting in my notes is I put that he stole Wonder Woman's belt buckle. We call it that. It's like this little wing thing.
I didn't catch that, but
yeah, you'll have to get
if I do get my like suede suit, I'm gonna have to get that with it.
Once you see it, you will not unsee it.
Just for our future, the things we've done and said. Let's just put them up and we'd be better instead. 'Cause I hate you and I berate you and I can't wait to get to you. This is about our fathers being performance for sons. The only choice we're given is how many men have done. And I rescue you and I say screw you and I help your blue true.
Yeah, sorry, time paradoxes. That's I think that's a good place to go. What were we selling the watch? Was it
The glasses? Yeah.
the glasses? Yeah, the watch would make sense. Yes, it is definitely the glasses.
Just establishing right there for the rest of the movie that what they do in the past doesn't actually matter as long as they get those whales.
I feel like that's because it's the 80s.
Just nothing mattered anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Any other time we'd have to think about it a little harder.
I think they're really telling us this is fun. This is not that serious. So like right off the bat, they're addressing what they know that fans are going to complain about, the paradox, and saying it doesn't matter, let it go. Let's move on and have fun.
Yeah, it's definitely, the tone is like almost a comedy, right? So you can't be getting bogged down in that stuff.
Yeah, they purposely wanted to do a lighter, funnier movie with this one that didn't have a villain. There is no villain in Star Trek 4, really, unless you count the probe, but there's not like a con in this movie.
Oh, I was going to count the director of the Cetacean Institute as the villain. I mean,
Who gets slapped in the face.
Yeah, gets slapped. The villain gets slapped in the face. But yeah, he's the closest thing to a villain. He's more of just like a, insufferable bureaucrat, so whatever.
Yeah, even the probe is like this enigmatic force. And has anyone else read the sequel novel, Probe?
No, have you?
Yeah.
Okay.
It basically comes
been
from
recommended to me.
It's actually it's a good one, but I kind of feel like the film is better without any explanations.
Yeah, having no subtitles for that conversation at the end is quite effective.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the 2001 thing. You read the book and they explain everything. And you're like, you didn't need to do that.
Probe kind of tries to do that. It is good, but yeah, I think I prefer it's this enigmatic thing. It needs to speak to whales. You're not going to understand, which is pretty cool.
It's causing a lot of destruction, but it's not doing so intentionally.
Yeah, it's just trying to find the whales.
Right.
Like it probably just sees the people. It does see humans as ants. Where are the whales? Who might be smarter anyway.
So long and thanks for all the fish.
Yeah. Since we talked about eating whales in Japan at the beginning. I should also mention I spent about half a year teaching at a whale camp, wherein we would teach about marine science and take kids on boats twice a week and go looking for whales. So I have the other side of the coin too. I did a bit of my own Cetacean Institute thing. Although I would often make the horrible joke that if we ever started running out of money, we could just like mount a harpoon on the front of this thing.
I don't know if I've told it on the podcast before, but since we're doing whales section, I've told you about my friend who had a whale land on her, right?
Oh yeah.
Well, my friend's sister. But yeah, I bumped into my friend's mum and I was working in a supermarket and I was like, oh yeah, how's the family? She's like, oh yeah, do you hear about Charlotte? No. Whale landed on her. I was like, what? So I just go on Google, I type Charlotte Kinloch whale. Sure enough, she's in a little dinghy and it just comes out of the water and boom, lands on her. She was pretty much fine, got like some bruising. But she was shoved underwater by a humpback whale.
Wow.
I guess that more aggressive than George and Gracie, I guess.
I don't know if it was attacking or just like trying to play.
The dolphins want to play. When I was doing that whale watching, sometimes the dolphins would be little pricks and I'm hanging on the side of the boat and they just come up and Rah! So they were definitely screwing with me. And then I had a whale breach and when they're doing their blow, that's like if I do a snot rocket.
Yeah.
And I got covered in snot, then I was sick the next day.
Nice.
I think
Ew.
You nearly like gave humanity the whale flu.
Yeah, I think I got the whale flu.
Or you might have just been like sick by the thought of it.
Yeah, really. Well, that does happen. So.
Well, I mean, if we're talking about the words left my brain. But we're talking about the whales and the whaling and the Cetacean Institute and the time travel aspect of this. But the other really interesting thing about this film is that for the first time that I can think of, this is a Star Trek show where its message, its socio-political commentary is not metaphor. They are literally saving the whales.
Yeah,
they are literally commenting on pollution. So any interpretation is gone. It's just it's not allegory. It's not metaphor. It's not couched really in a sci-fi story. Their mission is to literally save the whales.
Yeah, the only way it sort of uses a metaphor is the fact that there's a big probe coming to cause a problem rather than the environment being the problem on its own. But like,
right, which can just be seen as there's a problem because there are no whales.
Yeah, definitely. The movies hadn't really been so hadn't really had a message up to this point. Obviously, the show is very political, but the movies had tended to just be sci-fi action romps before this one. I can't really think of what message it was trying to ram down our throats in 1, 2, or 3.
The first one got very philosophical. I would
say.
Yeah,
very
but not
sci-fi, but not really.
They've certainly had themes, but I'm not so sure if there was a message other than like a personal one. I mean, something that crops up all the time in Roddenberry's stuff that you see in The Cage, you see in the motion picture, you see over and over again anytime Kirk gets promoted is the feeling, well, one of being obsolete, of like no longer being good at your job, or of getting too old to do your job, sort of like aging out of the captaincy. And it's an interesting theme that keeps coming up in Roddenberry's works and over again. In the movies, especially because that cast is getting older, they bring it up more and more.
Also, I wonder if it's just the fact that he went from the fairly fun job of just writing episodes of Star Trek on TV to the presumably very tedious and red tapey job of producing huge Hollywood movies.
He's only executive producing by this point. I think they.
I don't know how much.
He was very active in the first season of Next Gen, but yeah, I from what I heard, he would just keep coming every time for the sequel, like with the script about them going back and either stopping
the JFK one.
Yeah, the JFK one. So
yeah. And there was almost always a power struggle, really, after the second season of TOS, where Gene was pushed out and he came back in and he got in a fight with this person and they got in a fight with that person. And I'm not sure how much he had to do hands-on with Star Trek 4, but his ideas keep coming back into play.
The philosophy definitely comes through here, even if, maybe it's more in Harbin and Nick Meyer's hands by this point, but they didn't like dilute the message, at least, even if they were kind of shoving the man out himself a bit.
Well, the theme of obsolescence was from as early as the first film, right? And he was very involved in that one.
From The Cage?
Literally, it was in The Cage in the original pilot.
True.
There's a whole scene with Pike and...
with the original Doctor, yeah.
The original Doctor. Boyce, thank you. About how, he's not sure he can do this anymore. And it even carries over, it's so ingrained in these original characters that it even carries over into the Kelvin universe, because in Beyond, we have Pine Kirk doing a voiceover about how, like, they've been out in space for 2 or 3 years and it's becoming so tedious, and is this really where he should be? And it's...
Well, that one also had the really idea of Spock was thinking of leaving as well in that one.
Mm-hmm.
It's... It reminds me, I've got a friend who's very into James Bond movies. And with each Bond, by the time you get to their last few films, they start doing the plot of, are you too old to be Bond? Is Bond obsolete? Blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of strange that Daniel Craig, they start doing that from his second film. It's kind of like, this is still meant to be young Kirk and Spock, but they're doing we're getting too old and we should retire plot in their third movie.
Well, there was a good 7 or 8 year difference between those treks, so
True.
they were.
The other crazy thing, have you ever looked at the ages of the Kelvin actors and when the original series actors were first cast? Because they're actually not much younger. People act like, oh, they've got this super young Kirk, but he's like 2 years younger than Shatner was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Definitely looking a touch older in this one, though.
Yes.
But that's what time does.
It gets us all eventually.
Well, you mentioned there's not a huge amount in terms of effects, but I mean that time travel sequence when they first go back with their giant morphing heads, that is something else.
Yeah, that was bizarre. I like that.
It has some digital, I think, which was actually used to offset it, so they want you to think like this digital is wonky. But then it has the fantastic analog effect of once they finished the Bird of Prey set, they painted the whole thing white.
Huh. Yeah, that's really impressive. Yeah, I think I just assumed it was like trick photography.
No, they painted everything white once they were finished. I thought that was pretty wild.
Yeah. Kind of reminded me of like some of the old Doctor Who openings, where like suddenly Tom Baker's face would come up on screen for a bit.
Yeah, yeah. And then the reeds and the wind shot always struck me as weird because it's just in the middle of this time trip, and then it goes back to space, which I wonder. Sometimes I bring up sometimes the Soviet film Solaris, which I think had the astronauts staring at reeds in the wind for like 5 minutes, listening to Bach. I always felt like maybe it was just a little nod to that. I don't know. I could be completely off.
Well, this was the first one shown in the Soviet Union, so maybe that was how they were trying to get them on board.
We'll do some more on the effects, definitely, because you have a point. There's some stuff here. But, yeah, I play classical music, too. And I remember the first time playing Bach's Brandenburg concertos. I'm like, wait a minute. The themes in this are just, like, really similar.
Huh.
So another little Bach connection there. That whole
like when they're running around the hospital and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it's all through the movie. But even the main theme is just it's very Brandenburg concerto. If there's any music dweebs out there,
I did miss the James Horner soundtrack, but also I think having a different composer set this movie apart.
It did. I mean, almost like to a detrimental thing where it does feel more like an '80s comedy now, but. That's fine because it is an 80s comedy, and it's not as bad as the Twin soundtrack, which I just screamed about for 5 minutes.
It would have felt weird if we'd had like the hijink scenes of them running around the 80s, and it had been playing like that epic Wrath of Khan, like dramatic music.
I'm just glad they didn't go with that 80s trope of having like rock music in like your fantasy or sci-fi movie. Like I'm thinking like Lady Hawk. Which was like a perfect period film except for the very modern soundtrack. Or like, what else?
Highlander with Brian May, which actually is pretty awesome, but still it's not like it doesn't quite make sense.
Right. Or like the Kelvin verse with the Beastie Boys.
Yeah. We do get the I Hate You song here, but that's a fun song.
Yeah.
And just one of the best jokes of the movie, so it gets a pass.
And different when it's written for the film.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's not the Hell Your soundtrack, then it's not going to work.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that was one thing I wanted to get at. There's like kind of controversy now because so much of the new Trek does have obscenities in it now, which morally I don't care. But the one thing is it ruins the whole canon of colorful metaphors.
Right. Well, I mean, there's like, between like the future scenes in this and the Picard is like 100 years.
Yeah, but
the colourful metaphor, but then Discovery is a bit more.
The Discovery crew is also dropping the F-bombs. Again, I don't actually care. I just like the fact that they're just like, they don't understand at all how to use these words.
It's every single time Spock swore, I was wetting myself laughing.
But does it ruin it? Because Spock's only with Kirk, right? And maybe it's just Kirk who doesn't swear.
It's just these two uptight dweebs don't swear. Because,
Well,
like,
'cause honestly,
McCoy
though,
always
like,
says Dan.
he says to him, it's your pattern of speech that's changed.
Yeah.
He doesn't notice it in anybody else.
The reason it disappoints me is just because the phrase colorful metaphors is in my normal working vocabulary when we're talking to people.
I just think maybe Kirk's Enterprise is like The Good Place, where he just really doesn't like swearing, so he doesn't let anybody do it.
He's edited the universal translators to censor people when they swear.
Yeah, now that Lower Decks is on, when we see the Saratoga at the beginning, I just like to think that it's a Cerritos sort of ship. Sorry, Luke, you haven't seen this yet. But
No. I just
seems
saw that out.
like maybe they actually could have kept their power or something, but they're not the best crew.
Okay. I was going to say, I saw a William Shatner panel a few weeks back. I think it was GalaxyCon thing. And he was complaining about how he couldn't have a big finale to Star Trek V because they ran out of money, because nobody told him how to budget when you were making a movie. And so I just think it's hilarious that Leonard Nimoy directed this movie and it cost $21 million and it was $1 million under budget. And it made a global total of $133 million.
Trek has a very good track record of letting their actors become directors, but Shatner, I guess, would be the exception to the rule.
I've got to say, I'm not surprised in the least to find out that Leonard Nimoy is better at math than William Shatner.
Oh my.
While we're just spit taking, what is a better disguise? Clark Kent's glasses or Spock's headband?
So I guess here's the real question: what's a better disguise, Spock's headband or Spock wearing a beanie and telling people he's Chinese?
Well, the headband is not as racist.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I just remembered the other line from that one where he's like, "Oh, my friend is clearly Chinese, and he caught his ears in a rice picking machine."
Yeah, the 60s were a different time.
But I really like that episode, and now I'm questioning it.
Well, that's the best one for most people, isn't it?
Right.
that's what happens when you watch 54-year-old media.
Yeah.
But no, my thought is you won't notice the headband because you're distracted by the bathrobe, which is pretty
right. And just the behavior and everything.
Too much LDS.
So I'm a little disappointed because I read that in the original script, Saavik had to stay on Vulcan because she was pregnant with Spock's child. Mm-hmm. And while that came out of nowhere, I'm actually kind of sad because think of how many storylines we could have had out of that.
There's got to be a novel on that somewhere because it's not clear that didn't happen. They just don't, reference it directly.
Right.
There you go.
But I feel like a big part of this film's mission was by the end of this film, status quo is completely restored. So a Spock child would have been a spanner in the works because they've gotten rid of David. They're back on the Enterprise. He's a captain again. They really wanted to be like, oh, next film is going to be just like how you remember it.
They opened the film talking about all of the charges that are being leveled against Kirk and his crew, and then just dismiss them because he saved Earth. Yes, saving Earth, good. We want to do that. But the charges he was facing before that were completely unrelated to this whale mission. Don't worry about it. It's cool. You can be a captain, which is what you want anyway, so it's more of a reward than a punishment. And here's a brand new shiny ship.
I can kind of understand that from the Federation and the Starfleet side. But what happened to the Klingons who were demanding his blood?
They're still pretty pissed in the next two films.
Okay, I don't remember them showing up much in 5.
Yeah, there's that. You forgot about it because it doesn't matter. But there's people if I can take out Kirk, I'll be
right. And then of course, by 6.
In 6, the Klingons are
the point of the film.
They throw him into prison finally.
So yeah, just for this film itself, they kind of expect you to forget that at the end.
Yeah.
Happy ending. Don't worry about that Klingon stuff.
Yeah, that is the most Star Trek that Star Trek ever Star Trekked, right? Is it forget about the bad stuff somebody did because they did something good later.
Mm-hmm.
Or on DS9 where they do something horrible and we just forget about it the next week. There's one that I recently watched with Worf just sabotaging Risa, and by the next week, he's back in charge of the Defiant.
How many times does Data take over the Enterprise D? A lot.
Uneclipsed by the blood moon, Echo Bridge, the seas still divide. I've got wind that love's rising.
The official title is the one with the whales, right? That's what it says on the poster.
According to the Japanese Amazon Prime, I just watched it on, it's The Long Road Home.
Isn't that Nelson Mandela's biography?
I think that was The Long Road to Freedom.
Oh, okay. That makes more sense anyway.
Yeah, he wasn't far from his home. He was just in a prison cell.
Right. Okay. I did read it. It was just 20 plus years
That also
ago.
might just be Google Translate.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it might be Google Translate too. You get some weird transliterated titles, but it's an outlier of the Star Trek films. It doesn't, I mean, if you wanted to be like this is Star Trek, does it work?
It's got more of the, like we were saying, this one's got a lot of a message, which is very Star Trek, and a very hopeful tone, which is very Star Trek. And to be honest, if you're talking about Star Trek to this point, every other episode was a time travel episode or an episode where the planet's based on Earth or something. So it is actually very Star Trek.
I guess it's a little contentious though, that just to say the Enterprise is a character. So Star Trek 3, we didn't get Spock. This one, we don't get the Enterprise, really.
That is, yeah. Especially, I remember I watched it, like I said, I watched it as a kid and then came back to it. I don't think I remembered that this whole film was in a Klingon ship. So I think I'd kind of superimposed the Enterprise into all of the Bird of Prey scenes when I'd thought about this film in the intervening years. But it's sort of a trilogy, right, of 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, watched
So
it works great narratively. I'm just like looking at it as like, here is like a prime example of Star Trek. Does it quite work?
I think it might be an outlier among the films that we have so far. But if you look back at the episodes of original Star Trek, I think it fits in really well. It's got that level of camp and fun that you see in episodes like The Trouble with Tribbles or Shore Leave. And I mean, that's one of the reasons I love it so much.
Well, and part of the beauty of Star Trek is there is no, this is what Star Trek is, example. Star Trek is a lot of things. So, like, to give an example of Star Trek, you'd kind of need to give, like, Motion Picture, Wrath of Khan, and Voyage Home. And say it's all of these things and more.
Yeah, this does tick one of the bigger boxes with those aforementioned episodes.
Yeah, the fun, campy Star Trek is part of Star Trek. So is serious action Star Trek. So is philosophical sci-fi Star Trek. So is super political Cold War allegory Star Trek, as we've got coming up. So it's all Star Trek.
Because it's a rich universe that can tell us a lot of different kinds of stories.
Exactly.
Yes, and I guess this is a good way to exploit that, just in a very interesting, like, let's go, 80s comedy way, which they could only do in the 80s, so it works that way. We have comedy Star Trek on TV now. Could you make an actual, like, comedy Star Trek movie now?
Well, they pretty much did. Like, the three Kelvin movies are full of jokes. It's the thing I keep bringing up. You can't do parodies anymore because the jokes are just in everything.
Yeah, I just feel like this Star Trek 4 actually does legitimately rate as a comedy, where the Kelvin versus Sci-Fi, just with like you said, the ironic. And
I would honestly say if you go and watch like 2009, there's as many jokes as there are in this. There's the bit where Kirk gets like teleported into the water pipes and Scotty's running around after him. There's like Scotty's got like a little comedy alien sidekick. It's full of that sort of thing.
Well, they cast Simon Pegg, didn't they?
Yeah. Well, yeah. You don't cast Simon Pegg because you want to make the most serious film ever, right?
It's the tone that's really different, right? The newer films have these comedic moments, but the tone of the film overall is a lot more serious and a lot more action. I would certainly not call The Voyage Home an action film by any means, and especially those like city street scenes reminds me a lot of Ghostbusters when they're like running around Manhattan early on in the film. And it just has that right level of camp. Could they do something like it today? I don't think they could do it without it being another low stakes story, right? Because there is no villain, because there's nobody they have to fight, because there's no space battle. I mean, yes, the Earth oceans are vaporizing, but that's happening years in the future. So they're able to have it be more like a romp because there's no immediate danger for the crew, and they need to find a creative way to replicate that kind of situation for something made today, and without copying it, because we all know how well that went with Into Darkness.
Although, to give an example outside of Star Trek, in the Marvel films, they had Thor Ragnarok, which was very much a comedy, but also like the highest stakes of all the Thor films. Like Asgard is like utterly destroyed in that film, but then the comedy kind of undercuts that. So can they just do a high stakes film and make it a comedy anyway, or do they have to make it low stakes for it to be a comedy?
I guess there's a certain feeling you get from. I mean, this is an inspiring one. Thor is still. I do like Ragnarok a lot, but it is kind of overwhelming in the end. This movie is kind of like, you're cooking and you put it on simmer. Sometimes you don't want to just like blast it on full heat, which is what something like Ragnarok is doing.
But I think that's just the way comedy films have changed since this period. Comedy films now have gone back to the airplane mode of just joke, never let up. Whereas the action films are at the same level of jokes as what a comedy film was in the 80s.
I'm thinking of the short Trek with the tribbles and how it's not really campy. It's more like tongue-in-cheek.
Right.
Yeah, I love that one. Especially the commercial at the end.
I really enjoyed that, but a lot of people complain that in order to make it a comedy, they kind of break a lot of what Star Trek is. In that she is a terrible commander. She's not Starfleet at all.
Those 8 to 10 minutes are very divisive.
Yeah.
Well, I like it. It's experimental. Some of the experiments work.
It's a comedy sketch. It's not supposed to be, this is the bold new direction for all of Trek. I couldn't get upset about it. But
That's a great point, though, that we're seeing, even with Lower Decks, we're seeing some of the same kind of complaints that, like, a comedy setup isn't Star Trek, quote unquote, because the characters are mean to each other, or nobody would ever talk to their commanding officer that way. And I think it's a tonal shift, right? When you go into a story that is going to be more comedic. Like, I have been rewatching Deep Space Nine currently, and every Thursday when we get a new Lower Decks, it is a massive tonal shift from Deep Space Nine to Lower Decks, but you just have to get in the right headspace for it, I think, and forgive it its use of like sitcom tropes almost, because remember, it's a comedy show.
I also think a lot of people forget, even in like TOS and TNG, Kirk and Picard are not the norm. Like, they are exceptional captains, and we often meet other captains who are not as like perfectly moral and stand up as they are.
Especially admirals.
Yeah. So it's not like Star Trek says literally everyone in Starfleet is like a moral super being. It's like, these are the ideals that they strive towards, and the characters we're going to look at happen to be like great examples of that, but they're still human beings. They're good people, bad people, petty people, noble people. And they just all happen to be working together for a common goal.
One other big difference, I think, in the comedy in this is it's not referential. Like, now there's got to be all the references to other stuff, but none of the comedy in here in particular, like, you don't need to know anything about previous Star Trek.
Maybe the Scotty talking to the computer joke, but that's like as bad as it gets.
Yeah, but he's from the future. He's trying to interface. Like, that makes sense. I mean, give one of our students, our students are 18 and under, give them a Apple IIe and see what they do.
Yeah. People are always sharing YouTube videos of kids trying to touch screens, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess it's very much, it's just a fish out of water comedy, right? So the jokes will just come from those weird interactions.
So I guess my take would be this film holds up very well, yet it's like a fascinating product of its time as well. That's something that would not happen now.
Perhaps this one holds up so well because it just revels in its 80s-ness. So maybe when you're watching something like Search for Spock, there are moments where it doesn't hold up so well because other films are still doing that and better. But no film that wasn't made in the 80s is trying to be the 80s. So, well, a few are.
Like you mentioned the Ghostbusters vibe on the street. Yeah, definitely. I guess we're going to wrap up here, but do you have any final thoughts you want to throw on this one?
Yeah, I was just thinking, we were talking about the film holding up. I think a lot of those movies we love from the 80s, when we say they don't hold up, people bring up most often cell phones, right? They could have solved this problem if they just had a cell phone when they could talk to each other. The thing is, because it's Star Trek, they kind of do. They have
Star
their
Trek invented cell
communicators.
phones.
Yeah, so that problem isn't there. So I think a lot of, because our characters from the future have Star Trek technology in the 80s, a lot of those common dings you would have at, like, does this 80s movie hold up, aren't there anymore. And I think, I think this one does a pretty good job. I think there might be some updated language if it were being written today, but that's about it. I mean, I also admit that this is my favorite Star Trek movie, so I have a hard time looking at it objectively. But yeah, that's it for me.
Now you've got me imagining all the colourful metaphors jokes, but with like Deadpool's vocabulary.
Not exactly what I meant, but sure.
Just Spock dropping F-bombs and C-bombs every other sentence. They are not the fuck your whales.
They do that in Discovery, don't
Yeah,
they?
true. Yeah, but can you imagine from Leonard Nimoy's mouth?
Yeah.
I love Spock just adding the hell randomly in the middle of sentences.
My favourite one is when they're on the ship, the mission is pretty much over, and he still says to Kirk, just a damn minute.
He learns well.
Yeah.
Sort of.
I was just thinking that I think part of the reason that the Trekkies love this one so much is because it's set in a setting that we're familiar with and that's real and that a lot of us have been to. And so it makes it, okay, let's be honest, we've all imagined ourselves in Star Trek stories before. So this movie makes it a little bit easier to imagine yourself in a Star Trek story because they're a part of our world in this one.
Yeah, it's like the convention on film almost.
Well,
Yeah.
the like archetype, stereotype of a Star Trek fan, right, is the socially awkward bit of a weirdo. So it's nice to see that Kirk and Spock are that as well when they come to our world.
Oh, I just have one final thought. If you tell me to trust you and give me a pizza with mushrooms, we've broken trust.
Yeah, mushrooms are just like slugs. I do not enjoy mushrooms. Maybe that's why I'm short, though. If I ate mushrooms like Mario.
Yeah.
Do we think Michelob paid for that product placement, though?
Yeah, probably as well. Say there's got to be a better beer selection as well.
I didn't even know what a Michelob was. I thought it was a cheese.
That's because you have better beers and.
Oh, yeah, I come from Europe. We have real beer.
Because you were born in 1990. Oh, it hurts.
Well, we'll roll into port, get in that new Enterprise. Of course, Women at Warp has quite a few fascinating episodes. The perfect trip for a late night long walk, and probably listening in your house and other places too. Can you tell us a bit about your podcast and how to get into that?
Sarah?
I am the new person here. Why don't you go ahead?
All right. So we are, Women at Warp is a feminist Star Trek podcast on the Roddenberry Podcast Network. Our mission is to explore intersectional diversity in infinite combinations. And you can find the show at womenatwarp.com or on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at Women at Warp.
Thanks. Okay. So, Sarah, don't feel too bad. I've been doing this podcast the entire time we've been doing it, and I still can't quite spit out the letters for our Twitter, which would be MLSFS pod.
Yes.
Then
Can you make it a full sentence?
Well, Luke here can just spit out the letters.
Yeah, if you like our podcast, you can find us on Twitter at MLSFS pod. We're also on Facebook. Just search Matt and Luke Sci-Fi Sanctuary. Give us an iTunes review, I guess. Apparently that helps. You should definitely do one because we're recording this literally on my 30th birthday. And if you've enjoyed the music you've heard during this podcast, you can find more of Matt's music at rovingsagemedia.bandcamp.com.
And then Luke also, he does sci-fi. He does Pokemon, which is kind of sci-fi with Luke Loves Pokemon and Luke Loves PKMN.
Yes.
That worked.
Yeah, but you still have to say, like, on Twitter.
On Twitter.
I mean, I guess if you say at, people know what you mean. It's 2020.
And Luke saw me close my eyes as I did the letters, too.
Yeah.
I didn't do them with my eyes open.
It's like seeing him get visions.
I can't spell. I need visions. I can't spell. I said it. I was at the first grade spelling bee. They'd be like "rat." I'm like SAT. You're out.
We changed our podcast intro after 5 years about a month ago, and every time I do it, I automatically go into the old one and stop myself about halfway through.
Yeah, that sounds like a nightmare.
You're lucky. Luke had to change our outro when we started getting more guests because it was rude.
We used to use a lot of colourful metaphors in the outro of our podcast, and then we started getting people on, and I felt really embarrassed about doing it.
What's today's outro then? Where are our fine guests and the good listeners do at this point?
Well, yep. Sarah, Sue, thanks for joining us. But you and the listeners at home can jump in the water and swim with the whales.
That's what I thought you'd say.
Yeah.
There's just nothing else to say on this one, is there?
No.
Okay.
I think I've used Beam Up before, so I couldn't use that.
Radio.
Next week, in time.